The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Phoenix as Detective Maria Rodriguez stepped out of her patrol car, the radio crackling with reports that made no sense. Multiple disturbances at Phoenix General Hospital. The dispatcher's voice wavered with uncertainty. Officers report unusual behavior from patients and staff. Maria had been a cop for 12 years, working her way up from beat patrol to detective, but nothing in her experience prepared her for what she witnessed as she approached the hospital's emergency entrance. The automatic doors hung askew, their glass panels spiderwebbed with cracks, and a trail of dark stains led from the building into the parking lot. The first thing that struck her wasn't the destruction, but the silence, an eerie quiet that seemed to swallow even the distant hum of traffic from the interstate. Inside the hospital lobby, chaos had frozen into a grotesque tableau. Overturned chairs and scattered medical equipment told the story of a desperate struggle, but it was the figures shambling through the corridors that made Maria's hand instinctively move to her service weapon. They moved with an unnatural gait, their clothes torn and stained, their faces bearing expressions of mindless hunger that chilled her to the bone. One of them, wearing scrubs that had once been white, turned toward her with milky, unfocused eyes, and Maria realized with growing horror that this was no ordinary emergency call. Across town, construction foreman Jessica Thompson was directing her crew on the renovation of an old warehouse when her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. The message was brief but alarming. Shelter in place. Avoid contact with affected individuals. Await further instructions. Jessica had built her reputation in a male-dominated industry through sheer determination and an iron will that had carried her through countless challenges, from workplace discrimination to dangerous job sites. Standing 6 feet tall with arms sculpted by years of heavy lifting, she commanded respect from her crew not through intimidation, but through competence and unwavering leadership. As she read the alert again, trying to make sense of its vague warnings, screams echoed from the street outside, followed by the sound of screeching tires and breaking glass. The warehouse windows offered a clear view of the main thoroughfare, and what Jessica saw there defied explanation. People were running in panic, some carrying children, others helping the elderly, all fleeing from something that pursued them with relentless determination. The pursuers moved differently, jerky, uncoordinated, but with a single-minded purpose that was terrifying to witness. Jessica's crew gathered around her, their faces reflecting the same confusion and growing fear that she felt. "Lock down the site," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding outside. "Secure all entrances and gather whatever tools we can use to defend ourselves." Meanwhile, at the Phoenix Community Center, fitness instructor Amanda Brooks was leading her morning self-defense class when the first reports began filtering through social media. Amanda had dedicated her life to empowering women, teaching them not just physical techniques but the mental fortitude needed to protect themselves and others. Her students ranged from college-aged women to mothers in their 50s, all united by a desire to feel safer in an increasingly uncertain world. The class had been practicing defensive stances when Amanda's phone lit up with notifications, videos that seemed too bizarre to be real, showing people attacking others with a savage intensity that belonged in horror movies, not in the suburbs of Phoenix. The videos showed scenes of unprecedented violence, but what disturbed Amanda most was the behavior of the attackers. They showed no response to pain, no fear, no recognition of the people they were assaulting. It was as if something fundamental about their humanity had been stripped away, leaving only a primal drive to attack and consume. As she watched, Amanda noticed something else that made her blood run cold. The attacks were spreading, moving outward from what appeared to be several central points throughout the city like ripples in a pond. Dr. Rachel Martinez, an emergency room physician at Phoenix General, had been on duty when the first wave of victims arrived. What she initially assumed were cases of extreme drug intoxication or some form of mass psychosis quickly revealed itself to be something far more sinister. The patients displayed symptoms unlike anything in her medical training: complete loss of higher brain function, aggressive behavior that required multiple orderlies to restrain them, and most disturbing of all, bite wounds that seemed to accelerate whatever condition was affecting them. When her colleague Dr. Stevens was attacked by a patient they thought was sedated, Rachel watched in horror as the bite wound on his arm began to show signs of rapid infection, his skin taking on a grayish pallor within minutes. The hospital's security protocols proved inadequate against patients who felt no pain and showed superhuman strength in their mindless aggression. Rachel found herself barricaded in a supply closet with 2 nurses, listening to the sounds of chaos echoing through the corridors outside. The emergency broadcast system crackled to life over the hospital's intercom, delivering a message that confirmed her worst fears. This is not a test. A state of emergency has been declared for the Phoenix metropolitan area. Citizens are advised to avoid contact with affected individuals and seek immediate shelter. Military assistance is being deployed. As the announcement repeated, Rachel realized that whatever was happening had spread far beyond the walls of her hospital, and that the women of Phoenix were about to face a threat unlike anything they had ever imagined. The emergency broadcast had barely finished when the lights in Rachel's supply closet flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the pale glow of her phone screen. Outside, the sounds of destruction grew louder, metal crashing, glass shattering, and underneath it all, a low moaning that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Nurse Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran of the emergency room, pressed her ear to the door and whispered urgently, "They're moving in groups now. I can hear at least a dozen of them in the hallway." Rachel's mind raced through everything she had observed about the infected patients. Their coordination was minimal, but their persistence was absolute, and they seemed drawn to sound and movement like moths to flame. Maria Rodriguez had managed to reach the hospital's administrative wing, where she found a small group of survivors huddled in the billing office. Among them was Dr. Elizabeth Carter, the hospital's chief of staff, whose usual composure had given way to barely controlled panic. "Detective, thank God," Dr. Carter breathed as Maria entered. "We've lost contact with most of the hospital. The infection, or whatever this is, it's spreading faster than we can contain it." Maria studied the group: 2 orderlies, a janitor, and 3 administrative staff members, all looking to her for answers she didn't have. Through the office windows, she could see the parking lot filling with abandoned vehicles as people fled on foot, many carrying whatever belongings they could manage. The sound of splintering would echo through the building as the infected began breaking through barricaded doors. Maria knew they had minutes, maybe less, before their position was compromised. "Is there another way out of here?" she asked Dr. Carter, who nodded toward a maintenance corridor that connected to the hospital's loading dock. "The service tunnels run under the entire complex, but I don't know if they're clear." Maria made the decision that would define the next several hours of their lives. "We move now, stay quiet, and stick together. Anyone who can't keep up gets left behind." The harsh reality of their situation demanded brutal honesty, and she saw understanding dawn in their eyes. Jessica Thompson had transformed the warehouse into a fortress, using her crew's expertise with power tools and construction materials to reinforce every entrance. The building's industrial design worked in their favor: thick concrete walls, minimal windows, and a single main entrance that could be easily defended. Her crew of 8 men looked to her for leadership, and Jessica felt the weight of their trust as she organized their defenses. "Tommy, you and Mike take the welding torches and seal the loading bay doors. Carlos, inventory everything we can use as weapons: crowbars, hammers, anything with weight behind it." The familiar rhythm of coordinating a work site helped calm her nerves, even as the situation outside deteriorated rapidly. From their elevated position, Jessica could see the infection spreading through the surrounding neighborhood like wildfire. The infected moved in loose groups, drawn by noise and activity, overwhelming anyone who tried to stand against them through sheer numbers. She watched a police barricade fall within minutes as dozens of infected swarmed the officers, their protective gear useless against an enemy that felt no pain and showed no fear. The sight reinforced her decision to fortify their position rather than attempt to flee. "We're safer here than out there," she told her crew, though she wondered how long their supplies would last and whether help would arrive before they were discovered. Amanda Brooks had made the difficult decision to evacuate the community center with her self-defense class, but not before gathering every piece of equipment that could serve as a weapon. baseball bats from the sports storage, kitchen knives from the center's cafe, and even fire extinguishers that could blind and disorient attackers. Her group of 12 women ranged in age from 19 to 54, and Amanda knew that their survival depended on staying together and using their training effectively. "Remember everything we've practiced," she told them as they prepared to leave. "Stay aware of your surroundings, watch each other's backs, and don't hesitate when the moment comes to fight." The streets outside the community center had become a maze of abandoned vehicles and debris, with small groups of infected wandering aimlessly until something caught their attention. Amanda led her group through back alleys and side streets, avoiding the main roads where the largest concentrations of infected seemed to gather. They moved in single file, communicating through hand signals Amanda had taught them, each woman carrying whatever weapon she could handle effectively. The youngest member of their group, college student Jennifer Walsh, had initially frozen when they encountered their first infected individual, but Amanda's firm guidance helped her find the courage to continue. Their destination was Amanda's apartment complex, a 3-story building with a secure entrance and multiple escape routes. The journey that normally took 10 minutes stretched into an hour of careful navigation, hiding behind cars and ducking into doorways whenever infected individuals appeared. Amanda's military father had taught her basic tactical awareness during her childhood, lessons she never thought she would need but now proved invaluable. As they approached the apartment building, she could see other survivors moving through the area, some alone, others in small groups, all sharing the same desperate look of people whose world had changed forever in the span of a few hours. The apartment building's lobby was empty but showed signs of hasty evacuation, scattered mail, an overturned plant, and the security door propped open with a shoe. Amanda's apartment on the second floor became their temporary sanctuary, its windows offering a clear view of the surrounding streets while remaining high enough to avoid easy detection. As her group settled in, Amanda began planning their next moves, knowing that staying in one place too long would eventually lead to discovery. The infected might lack intelligence, but they possessed an inexhaustible patience that made them formidable hunters. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, and Amanda realized that darkness would bring new challenges they weren't prepared to face. As darkness fell over Phoenix, the city transformed into a nightmare landscape where the moans of the infected echoed off empty buildings like a twisted symphony. Rachel Martinez had successfully led her small group through the hospital's maintenance tunnels, emerging near the loading dock where delivery trucks sat abandoned with their doors hanging open. The cool night air carried the acrid smell of smoke from fires burning unchecked throughout the city, and the distant sound of gunfire suggested that organized resistance was still possible, though scattered and desperate. Rachel's medical training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of her colleagues and patients transformed into mindless predators. The group moved cautiously through the hospital's rear parking area, staying low between vehicles and avoiding the pools of light cast by emergency lighting that continued to function despite the chaos. Dr. Carter whispered urgently about a medical supply warehouse several blocks away where they might find antibiotics and other medications that could prove crucial if any of them were injured. Rachel knew that treating bite wounds from the infected would be pointless. She had seen the transformation happen too quickly for any conventional medicine to help. But other injuries were inevitable in their current situation. Maria Rodriguez took point as they navigated the maze of abandoned cars, her police training automatically assessing threats and escape routes. The infected seemed less active in the darkness, moving more slowly and appearing to rely more heavily on sound to locate prey. This gave the group an advantage, but it also meant that any noise they made would draw unwanted attention from a wider area. Behind them, the hospital continued to burn in several places, the flames casting dancing shadows that made every movement seem threatening. Jessica Thompson's warehouse fortress had held through the first night, but dawn brought new challenges as larger groups of infected began gathering outside their building. Her crew had taken shifts watching the perimeter, and the reports were troubling. The infected were displaying more coordinated behavior, moving in packs of 20 or 30 individuals who seemed to share some form of primitive communication. "They're learning," observed Tommy Martinez, one of her most experienced workers, as he watched through a reinforced window. "Yesterday they wandered around randomly, but now they're moving with purpose. The warehouse's industrial location had initially seemed like an advantage, isolated from residential areas where the infection had spread most rapidly. However, Jessica now realized that their isolation also meant rescue would be unlikely to reach them quickly. Radio communications had become sporadic, with emergency broadcasts repeating the same warnings about avoiding contact with infected individuals and seeking military assistance that seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive. Jessica made the difficult decision to begin rationing their food and water supplies, calculating that they had perhaps 3 days before they would be forced to venture outside. Her crew had fashioned weapons from construction materials, rebar clubs, nail-studded boards, and improvised spears made from welding rods. Jessica herself carried a heavy sledgehammer that she could wield with devastating effectiveness, her years of construction work having built the strength and endurance necessary for prolonged physical combat. The men looked to her for leadership not because she was the strongest or most experienced fighter, but because she possessed the calm determination needed to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Amanda Brooks had spent the night organizing her group of women into an effective survival unit, assigning roles based on each person's strengths and abilities. Jennifer Walsh, despite her initial fear, had proven to have excellent eyesight and steady nerves, making her ideal for watch duty. Margaret Chen, a nurse in her 40s, became their medical officer, while Lisa Rodriguez, who worked in IT, took charge of monitoring radio communications and social media for information about safe zones or rescue operations. The apartment building had attracted other survivors during the night, and Amanda found herself coordinating with residents from other floors to establish a more comprehensive defense. The building's elderly superintendent, Frank Morrison, had intimate knowledge of the structure's layout and revealed the existence of a rooftop access that could serve as an escape route if the lower floors were compromised. Together, they had barricaded the main entrance and stairwells, creating choke points where a small number of defenders could hold off larger groups of infected. From her second-floor window, Amanda could see the infection's impact on the surrounding neighborhood. Houses stood empty with front doors hanging open, cars were scattered across lawns where panicked drivers had lost control, and small groups of infected wandered through the streets with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. The sight that disturbed her most was a school bus overturned near the intersection, its yellow paint stark against the asphalt, reminding her that children had been caught in this catastrophe. As the second day progressed, Amanda's group began venturing out in carefully planned scavenging missions to nearby houses and stores. They moved in pairs, never staying away from the building for more than 30 minutes, and always maintaining radio contact with the base group. These expeditions yielded crucial supplies, canned food, bottled water, first aid materials, and additional weapons including kitchen knives and gardening tools that could be used effectively in close combat. The infected seemed to be evolving in their behavior, showing increased aggression during daylight hours and displaying a disturbing tendency to investigate areas where humans had recently been present. Amanda noticed that they were drawn not just to sound and movement, but also to scent, following trails that led them closer to survivor hideouts. This observation led her to implement strict hygiene protocols and the use of strong-smelling substances like bleach and ammonia to mask human odors around their building. Radio communications brought fragmentary reports of military units establishing safe zones in major cities, but Phoenix seemed to have been largely abandoned as the infection spread too rapidly for effective containment. Amanda realized that her group, like countless others throughout the city, would need to rely on their own resources and determination to survive until the crisis passed or they could reach one of the rumored safe zones hundreds of miles away. The third day brought an ominous change that none of the survivors had anticipated. The infected were beginning to show signs of primitive organization. Rachel Martinez observed this disturbing development as her group took shelter in an abandoned pharmacy, watching through boarded windows as groups of infected moved through the streets with what appeared to be coordinated purpose. They no longer wandered aimlessly but seemed to follow specific routes, almost as if they were patrolling territories or searching systematically for survivors. Dr. Carter, who had been studying the infected's behavior obsessively, whispered her theory that some form of collective intelligence was emerging among them. The pharmacy had provided them with valuable medical supplies, but Rachel knew their current location was temporary at best. The infected had been drawn to the area by the sound of breaking glass when they had forced entry, and it was only a matter of time before larger groups arrived to investigate. Maria Rodriguez had scouted the surrounding blocks and reported that the infected were converging on their area from multiple directions, moving in loose formations that suggested they were communicating through means the survivors couldn't detect. Rachel's medical knowledge became crucial as she treated minor injuries sustained during their escape from the hospital. A deep cut on orderly James Patterson's arm required careful cleaning and stitching, work made more difficult by their need to remain silent and the constant fear that the smell of blood might attract unwanted attention. She had also begun documenting her observations about the infection, noting that the transformation seemed to occur more rapidly in younger, healthier individuals, while older people showed more resistance to whatever pathogen was causing the outbreak. Jessica Thompson's warehouse fortress faced its greatest test when a massive group of infected, numbering in the hundreds, surrounded the building just after dawn. The sight was terrifying, a sea of gray, decaying faces pressed against the reinforced windows, their hands clawing uselessly at the steel barriers her crew had installed. The infected showed no signs of giving up, maintaining their siege with the patience of creatures who had no other purpose than to reach the living humans inside. The warehouse's industrial ventilation system became both a blessing and a curse, providing fresh air but also carrying the sounds of the infected's moaning throughout the building. Jessica's crew took turns monitoring different sections of the perimeter, reporting that the infected were testing every possible entry point with methodical persistence. "They're not just mindless anymore," observed Carlos Mendez, watching as groups of infected worked together to stack debris against the building's walls, apparently attempting to reach the higher windows. Jessica made the difficult decision to begin preparing for a breakout, knowing that their supplies wouldn't last indefinitely, and that the infected showed no signs of losing interest in their location. She organized her crew into teams, each responsible for carrying specific supplies and equipment that would be essential for survival outside the warehouse. The plan was desperate but necessary. They would use the building's loading crane to create a distraction on one side while escaping through a carefully prepared exit on the opposite end. Amanda Brooks had transformed her apartment building into a well-organized survival community, with 37 residents working together under her leadership. The building's residents included a retired Army sergeant named Robert Hayes, whose military experience proved invaluable in organizing their defenses, and a high school chemistry teacher named Patricia Williams, who had begun experimenting with homemade explosives using cleaning supplies and other common materials. The apartment building's rooftop had become their primary observation post, offering a clear view of the surrounding area and serving as a communication hub where they maintained contact with other survivor groups throughout the city. Amanda had established a network of safe houses and supply caches, coordinating with other groups to share information about infected movements and resource locations. This network had already saved lives, warning groups about large concentrations of infected and directing them toward areas that remained relatively clear. From the rooftop, Amanda could see that the infection had spread far beyond Phoenix, with smoke rising from distant cities and the complete absence of air traffic suggesting that the crisis was nationwide or possibly global in scope. The realization that help might not be coming forced her to begin planning for long-term survival, including the possibility of establishing a permanent settlement in a more defensible location outside the city. The building's residents had proven remarkably adaptable, with people who had never held weapons learning to fight effectively and individuals who had lived solitary lives working together for the common good. Amanda's self-defense training had expanded to include everyone in the building, from teenagers to senior citizens, each learning techniques appropriate to their physical capabilities and limitations. A breakthrough came when Patricia Williams successfully created improvised explosive devices using fertilizer from the building's garden center and fuel from abandoned vehicles. These weapons proved devastatingly effective against groups of infected, clearing entire streets and creating safe corridors for scavenging missions. However, the explosions also attracted infected from greater distances, forcing Amanda to use them sparingly and only when absolutely necessary. The most disturbing development was the appearance of what Amanda termed alpha infected, individuals who seemed to retain more of their human intelligence while still displaying the aggressive behavior and physical resilience of the others. These alphas appeared to direct the movements of regular infected, pointing them towards survivor locations and coordinating attacks with frightening effectiveness. Amanda realized that the survival strategies that had worked during the first few days would need to evolve rapidly to address this new threat. Radio communications brought reports of similar alpha-infected appearing in other cities, suggesting that the infection was entering a new phase that would require completely different survival tactics. Amanda began planning for the possibility that traditional hiding and fortification strategies would become obsolete, and that active resistance might be the only way to ensure long-term survival. The women of Phoenix were about to discover that their greatest test was yet to come. The emergence of the alpha-infected marked a turning point that forced all survivor groups to abandon their defensive strategies and embrace active warfare. Rachel Martinez witnessed this shift firsthand when her group encountered their first alpha while scavenging medical supplies from a veterinary clinic. The creature retained enough human intelligence to set a trap, using regular infected as bait while positioning itself for an ambush that nearly cost them everything. Only Maria Rodriguez's quick thinking and accurate shooting saved them from what would have been a devastating loss. The alpha-infected displayed tactical awareness that made them exponentially more dangerous than their mindless counterparts. They could open doors, operate simple tools, and most terrifyingly, they seemed capable of learning from failed attacks. Rachel observed one alpha studying the pharmacy where they had previously taken shelter, examining their improvised barricades with the focused attention of a predator analyzing its prey's defenses. The creature's eyes, while clouded with the milky film of infection, showed an intelligence that was both familiar and utterly alien. Maria Rodriguez had begun coordinating with other law enforcement survivors through emergency radio frequencies, sharing intelligence about alpha behavior and developing tactics to counter their evolving threat. The alphas appeared to be territorial, each controlling groups of regular infected numbering between 50 and 200 individuals. They established patrol routes, defended specific areas, and showed the ability to adapt their strategies based on human resistance patterns. The veterinary clinic provided Rachel's group with valuable resources, including tranquilizer guns and animal sedatives that proved effective against regular infected, though the alphas showed resistance to chemical intervention. More importantly, they discovered that the alphas were vulnerable to the same physical damage as regular infected, but their retained intelligence made them far more difficult to approach and eliminate. Jessica Thompson's warehouse breakout had succeeded, but at a terrible cost. 3 members of her crew were lost during the escape, overwhelmed by infected who had anticipated their exit strategy with disturbing accuracy. The survivors, Jessica, Tommy Martinez, Carlos Mendez, Mike Sullivan, and David Park, now found themselves moving through a city that had become a hunting ground where they were clearly the prey. The group had salvaged what supplies they could carry, including welding equipment that Tommy had modified into flame-throwing devices using propane tanks and copper tubing. These weapons proved devastatingly effective against groups of infected, but the noise and light they produced also attracted attention from vast distances. Jessica realized they were engaged in a deadly balance between offensive capability and stealth, each use of their more powerful weapons potentially drawing more enemies than they could handle. Their destination was a construction site on the city's outskirts where Jessica had been working before the outbreak, a partially completed office complex that offered multiple defensive positions and escape routes. The journey required them to cross territory controlled by at least 3 different alpha-infected, each presenting unique challenges based on their individual tactical preferences and the terrain they commanded. Jessica's leadership was tested as never before when they encountered an alpha that had learned to use vehicles as weapons, driving abandoned cars into buildings where survivors might be hiding. The creature's coordination with its infected followers was sophisticated enough to execute complex maneuvers, including flanking attacks and coordinated assaults from multiple directions simultaneously. Amanda Brooks had transformed her apartment building into the headquarters of a growing resistance network that now included over 200 survivors scattered across dozens of locations throughout Phoenix. Her background in self-defense instruction had evolved into military-style tactical planning as she coordinated strikes against alpha-infected and their territories. The network had become so effective that they were actively hunting the alphas rather than simply defending against them. The apartment building's rooftop had been converted into a communications center where Lisa Rodriguez maintained contact with survivor groups as far away as Tucson and Flagstaff. The reports painted a grim picture of a world where traditional government and military structures had collapsed, leaving scattered groups of civilians to fight for survival against an enemy that grew stronger and more organized with each passing day. Amanda's most successful innovation was the development of coordinated strike teams that could eliminate alpha infected through carefully planned ambushes. These operations required precise timing and flawless execution, as failure meant not just the loss of the strike team but also retaliation against the entire survivor network. The teams consisted of her most experienced fighters, including Jennifer Walsh, who had overcome her initial fear to become one of their most effective scouts. The strike teams had developed specialized tactics for different types of alpha infected, recognizing that each creature retained different aspects of human intelligence and therefore required unique approaches. Some alphas were more aggressive and could be lured into traps, while others were cautious and required more subtle strategies. The most dangerous were those that seemed to retain memories of their human lives, using knowledge of the city's layout and infrastructure to create nearly impregnable defensive positions. Patricia Williams had become the network's chief weapons specialist, developing increasingly sophisticated explosive devices and chemical weapons using materials scavenged from abandoned stores and industrial facilities. Her latest creation was a form of napalm made from gasoline and soap that could clear entire city blocks of infected, though the environmental consequences of such weapons weighed heavily on everyone's conscience. The network's greatest victory came when they successfully eliminated an alpha that had been coordinating attacks across the entire eastern section of the city. The operation required 48 hours of careful planning and involved simultaneous strikes on the alpha's lieutenant infected, while Amanda personally led the assault on the creature itself. The battle was fierce and costly, but its success proved that the alphas could be defeated through coordinated human effort. However, victory came with an unexpected consequence. The elimination of one alpha seemed to trigger increased activity among the others, as if they were responding to the loss of their fellow creature. Amanda realized that the infected were more connected than anyone had suspected, and that their war against the alphas had entered a new phase where every victory would be met with escalating retaliation. The women of Phoenix were no longer just fighting for survival. They were engaged in a war for the future of humanity itself. The retaliation came swiftly and with a coordination that shattered any remaining illusions about the infected being mindless creatures. Within hours of the alpha's elimination, every survivor group in Amanda's network found themselves under simultaneous assault by infected forces that moved with military precision. The attacks were clearly coordinated across the entire city, suggesting a level of communication between alphas that the survivors had never suspected existed. Rachel Martinez's group faced their most desperate hour when waves of infected began systematically searching every building in their sector, moving from structure to structure with methodical thoroughness. The creatures were no longer responding to sound or movement alone but seemed to be following predetermined search patterns that left no hiding place unexplored. Rachel realized with growing horror that the alphas had learned to think strategically, treating the city like a battlefield where every building was a potential enemy stronghold. The veterinary clinic that had served as their temporary refuge became a death trap when infected began entering through ventilation systems and service tunnels that the survivors hadn't even known existed. Maria Rodriguez organized a fighting retreat that saved most of the group, but the experience taught them that static defenses were no longer viable against an enemy that could adapt and learn from each encounter. Dr. Carter made a crucial observation during their escape. The infected were displaying different behavioral patterns based on the time of day, becoming more aggressive and coordinated during daylight hours while reverting to more primitive hunting instincts after dark. This discovery led Rachel to propose a radical change in strategy. Instead of hiding during the day and moving at night, they would reverse their schedule, using the infected's reduced coordination during darkness to their advantage. Jessica Thompson's construction site had become a fortress under siege, with her reduced crew facing constant probing attacks from infected forces that seemed to be testing their defenses for weaknesses. The partially completed office building provided excellent defensive positions, but Jessica knew that their ammunition and supplies were finite, while their enemies seemed inexhaustible. Tommy Martinez had proven invaluable in fortifying their position, using his welding skills to create barriers and weapons that could withstand the infected's relentless assaults. His flame-throwing devices had evolved into more sophisticated weapons that could be operated from protected positions, allowing the defenders to inflict massive casualties without exposing themselves to counterattack. The most disturbing development was the appearance of infected who seemed to be conducting reconnaissance, observing the construction site from distant positions and then withdrawing before the defenders could engage them. Jessica realized that the Alphas were gathering intelligence about their defenses, studying their tactics and preparing for a coordinated assault that would overwhelm their position through sheer force of numbers. Carlos Mendez had taken charge of supply management, rationing their resources with mathematical precision while also organizing scavenging missions to nearby buildings. These expeditions had become increasingly dangerous as the infected learned to anticipate human movement patterns, setting ambushes along routes that had previously been considered safe. Amanda Brooks faced the greatest challenge of her leadership as reports flooded in from across her network about coordinated attacks that were systematically dismantling their carefully constructed resistance organization. Safe houses that had remained hidden for days were being discovered and overrun, supply caches were being destroyed, and communication nodes were being eliminated with surgical precision. The apartment building itself came under direct assault when a massive force of infected, led by 3 different Alphas working in coordination, launched a multi-pronged attack designed to overwhelm their defenses. The battle raged for 6 hours, with defenders fighting from room to room as infected forces penetrated the building's lower levels through methods that demonstrated sophisticated tactical planning. Jennifer Walsh distinguished herself during the battle, using her knowledge of the building's layout to coordinate flanking maneuvers that caught the infected forces off guard. Her transformation from frightened college student to hardened warrior exemplified the changes that survival had forced upon all of them, but the cost in human terms was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Patricia Williams deployed her most powerful explosive devices during the assault, collapsing entire sections of the building to prevent infected forces from advancing while creating escape routes for trapped defenders. The explosions were visible from miles away, serving as both a beacon of resistance and a target for every infected creature in the surrounding area. The battle's turning point came when Amanda realized that the Alphas were coordinating their attack through some form of communication that the survivors couldn't detect. She organized a desperate strike team to eliminate the lead Alpha, knowing that disrupting their command structure might cause the assault to collapse. The mission required her to leave the building's defenses during the height of the battle, trusting her people to hold their positions while she led a small team through infected-controlled territory. The confrontation with the Alpha was unlike anything Amanda had experienced, facing a creature that retained enough human intelligence to anticipate her tactics while possessing the physical resilience and savage aggression of the infected. The battle was decided by inches and seconds, with Amanda's self-defense training and unwavering determination barely overcoming the Alpha's supernatural strength and coordination. The Alpha's elimination did cause the assault to falter, but not before the apartment building had suffered catastrophic damage and the loss of nearly a third of its defenders. Amanda realized that their network's survival depended on abandoning fixed positions and adopting a more mobile strategy that could match the infected's evolving tactics. As dawn broke over the devastated city, the surviving members of Amanda's network began implementing a new phase of resistance, one that would transform them from defenders into hunters, taking the fight directly to the Alphas before they could organize another coordinated assault. The women of Phoenix were about to discover that their greatest strength lay not in hiding from their enemies, but in confronting them with the same relentless determination that had made humanity the dominant species on Earth. The transformation from defenders to hunters marked the beginning of humanity's counteroffensive, as Amanda Brooks coordinated the most ambitious operation yet attempted by the Phoenix Resistance Network. Intelligence gathered from captured Alpha territories revealed a disturbing truth. The infected were not just randomly spreading but were systematically establishing a new form of civilization, with the Alphas serving as a ruling class over vast hordes of regular infected who functioned as both workers and soldiers. Rachel Martinez had become the network's chief intelligence officer, using her detective skills to map the infected's territorial divisions and identify the command structure that governed their operations. Her medical background, combined with Dr. Carter's expertise, had led to the discovery that alphas were not randomly created but were specifically chosen based on their pre-infection intelligence and leadership capabilities. This revelation meant that eliminating alphas was not just tactically important but strategically crucial to preventing the infected from developing into a permanent threat to human survival. The intelligence network that Rachel had established revealed that Phoenix was just one of dozens of cities where similar alpha-controlled territories were emerging, suggesting a coordinated transformation that extended far beyond their local situation. Radio communications with survivor groups in other cities confirmed that the infection had entered a new phase where the goal was no longer simple spread but the establishment of a new social order with infected alphas as the dominant species. Maria Rodriguez had taken charge of training operations, transforming ordinary survivors into effective combat units capable of operating in infected-controlled territory. Her police training provided the foundation for tactics that emphasized stealth, precision, and rapid extraction rather than prolonged engagement. The training was brutal and unforgiving, but it was producing fighters who could match the infected's coordination with superior human intelligence and adaptability. Jessica Thompson's construction site had evolved into a mobile command center, with her crew using their engineering expertise to develop vehicles and equipment specifically designed for operations against alpha-controlled territories. Tommy Martinez had created armored vehicles from construction equipment, while Carlos Mendez had developed portable fortification systems that could be rapidly deployed to create temporary safe zones during extended operations. The construction crew's greatest innovation was a series of underground tunnels that connected key points throughout the city, allowing resistance fighters to move undetected through infected territory. These tunnels required constant maintenance and defense, but they provided the strategic mobility that made large-scale operations possible. David Park had become the network's chief engineer, coordinating tunnel construction with other survivor groups to create a city-wide transportation system that the infected couldn't monitor or control. Jessica's leadership had expanded beyond her original crew to encompass a mobile strike force of over 100 fighters who specialized in rapid assault operations against alpha strongholds. These forces moved constantly, never remaining in one location long enough for the infected to organize effective countermeasures, and their success rate in eliminating alphas had begun to shift the balance of power in several sectors of the city. Amanda Brooks had established a war council that included the leaders of every major survivor group in Phoenix, coordinating their efforts into a unified campaign designed to systematically eliminate alpha territories and reclaim the city for human habitation. The council met in different locations each time, using the tunnel network to avoid detection, while planning operations that required precise timing and flawless execution. The War Council's most ambitious plan involved simultaneous strikes against all known alpha territories in the city, designed to prevent the creatures from coordinating their defenses or providing mutual support. The operation would require every available fighter and would leave the survivor communities vulnerable if it failed, but Amanda argued that the alternative was slow extinction as the alphas continued to grow stronger and more organized. Jennifer Walsh had become one of the network's most effective alpha hunters, leading specialized teams that focused on eliminating the most dangerous infected leaders through targeted assassination missions. Her youth and agility made her ideal for infiltration operations, while her growing tactical expertise allowed her to plan and execute missions that older, more experienced fighters considered impossible. Patricia Williams had developed chemical weapons specifically designed to disrupt the communication methods that alphas used to coordinate their forces, creating confusion and panic among infected groups that made them vulnerable to conventional attacks. Her weapons were controversial within the survivor community, but their effectiveness in breaking up large infected formations had proven crucial to the success of several major operations. The network's intelligence operations had revealed that the alphas were attempting to establish contact with similar groups in other cities, working towards some form of intercity coordination that would make them exponentially more dangerous. This discovery led Amanda to authorize the most dangerous mission yet attempted, a strike against the Central Alpha that appeared to be coordinating infected activities across the entire southwestern United States. The Central Alpha had established its headquarters in the ruins of Phoenix's City Hall, surrounded by thousands of infected followers and protected by defensive positions that demonstrated sophisticated military planning. The creature had retained enough human intelligence to understand the symbolic importance of its location while possessing the infected's supernatural resilience and coordination abilities. Amanda's plan for eliminating the Central Alpha required a three-pronged assault that would simultaneously attack the creature's defensive positions, disrupt its communication with other alphas, and create enough chaos to allow a small strike team to reach the target. The operation would involve nearly every fighter in the Phoenix Resistance Network and would determine whether humanity could reclaim their city or would be forced to abandon it to the infected. As the Resistance forces prepared for their final assault, Amanda reflected on how far they had all come from the frightened survivors who had hidden in buildings and basements just weeks earlier. The women of Phoenix had not just adapted to their new reality but had become the driving force behind humanity's fight for survival, proving that courage and determination could overcome even the most impossible odds. The final assault on Phoenix City Hall began at dawn, with Amanda Brooks leading a coordinated attack that represented the culmination of everything the Resistance Network had learned about fighting the infected. 3 separate strike forces moved simultaneously through the tunnel system, emerging at predetermined points around the City Hall complex while overhead, Patricia Williams' chemical weapons created a fog of confusion that disrupted the Alpha's ability to coordinate their defenses. Rachel Martinez commanded the Eastern Assault Team, using her medical knowledge to target the infected's physical vulnerabilities, while Maria Rodriguez led the tactical coordination that kept the human forces from being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The infected defenders fought with desperate ferocity, as if they understood that this battle would determine the future of their emerging civilization, but the human fighters had evolved beyond mere survival into a disciplined military force capable of matching their enemies' coordination with superior strategy and adaptability. Jessica Thompson's mobile strike force had positioned armored vehicles at key intersections around the City Hall, creating a perimeter that prevented infected reinforcements from reaching the battle while providing covering fire for the assault teams. Tommy Martinez operated a modified crane that had been converted into a siege engine, using it to breach the infected's defensive barriers, while Carlos Mendez coordinated supply lines that kept the human forces equipped with ammunition and medical support throughout the prolonged engagement. The battle for the City Hall's outer defenses raged for 3 hours, with infected forces displaying tactical sophistication that rivaled human military units. The Alphas had learned to use the building's architecture to their advantage, creating killing fields and choke points that maximized their defensive capabilities while minimizing the humans' numerical and technological advantages. However, the Resistance fighters had anticipated these tactics and had developed countermeasures that gradually wore down the infected's defensive positions. Amanda's personal strike team, including Jennifer Walsh and a select group of the network's most experienced fighters, penetrated the City Hall's interior through a maintenance tunnel that emerged directly beneath the building's main rotunda. The interior had been transformed into a grotesque parody of government, with infected creatures arranged in formations that suggested some form of hierarchical organization centered around the Central Alpha that occupied the mayor's former office. The Central Alpha proved to be unlike any infected creature the survivors had previously encountered, retaining not just intelligence but apparent memories of its human life as a former military officer who had been stationed in Phoenix during the initial outbreak. The creature's tactical awareness was supplemented by detailed knowledge of the city's layout and infrastructure, making it a formidable opponent that could anticipate human strategies and counter them with devastating effectiveness. Jennifer Walsh distinguished herself during the final confrontation, using her agility and tactical training to outmaneuver the Central Alpha's bodyguards, while Amanda engaged the creature in direct combat. The battle was decided by teamwork and sacrifice, with multiple Resistance fighters giving their lives to create the opening that allowed Amanda to deliver the killing blow that eliminated the Central Alpha and shattered the infected's command structure. The Central Alpha's death triggered a cascade effect throughout the infected population, with regular infected losing their coordination and reverting to the mindless wandering that had characterized the early days of the outbreak. The remaining alphas, deprived of their central coordination, began fighting among themselves for control of territories, creating chaos that the human resistance exploited to reclaim large sections of the city. Rachel Martinez established medical stations throughout the reclaimed areas, treating wounded fighters while also studying captured infected specimens to better understand the biological mechanisms that had created the alpha variants. Her research suggested that the infection was beginning to burn itself out, with new cases becoming increasingly rare and existing infected showing signs of physical deterioration that would eventually lead to their complete elimination. Jessica Thompson coordinated the massive reconstruction effort that began immediately after the battle, using her construction expertise to rebuild critical infrastructure while also establishing defensive positions that could repel any future infected incursions. The tunnel network that had been crucial to their military success was expanded into a comprehensive transportation system that connected all the major survivor settlements throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area. Amanda Brooks found herself serving as the de facto leader of a new form of government that emerged from the resistance network, coordinating the efforts of thousands of survivors who were working to rebuild civilization from the ruins of the old world. The experience had transformed not just her personally but had created a new model of leadership based on competence, courage, and the willingness to make difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. The women of Phoenix had proven that humanity's greatest strength lay not in technology or numbers but in the ability to adapt, learn, and work together in the face of existential threats. Their victory over the infected represented more than just survival. It was a demonstration that human courage and determination could overcome any challenge, no matter how impossible it might seem. As the sun set over a city that was slowly returning to life, Amanda stood on the roof of the reclaimed city hall and reflected on the journey that had brought them from terrified survivors to the architects of humanity's future. The infected threat was not completely eliminated, but it had been reduced to manageable levels that could be contained through vigilance and continued cooperation among the survivor communities. The story of the Phoenix Resistance would become legend, inspiring similar efforts in cities around the world where survivors were fighting their own battles against the infected. The women who had led this fight had not just saved their city but had created a template for human survival that would ensure the species' continued existence in a world forever changed by the outbreak that had tested the very limits of human endurance and determination.